Dolly Parton isn't just the queen of country music. She is the heartbeat of American soul, the woman whose voice wrapped pain in silk and sent it back to us as hope. For 6 decades, she gave the world songs that healed hearts and lit up darkness. But tonight, that same voice trembles on the edge of silence. In the early hours of the morning, her sister Frida posted a message that froze millions of fans in place. "I was up all night praying for my sister Dolly. She hasn't been feeling her best lately. I truly believe in the power of prayer, and I'm asking the world to pray with me. When worry comes from blood, you know it's real." The woman who once turned heartbreak into hymns, who gave us Jolene Coat of Many Colors and I Will Always Love You, now faces a battle no song can soften. Her light, once blazing across the world, has dimmed to a fragile flicker. For the first time in decades, the show has stopped. The Las Vegas lights that once burned in her name have gone dark. The crowd waits, the world holds its breath, and somewhere behind closed doors, in her quiet Nashville home, Dolly Parton fights the hardest song she's ever had to sing, the song of survival. But before we can understand the silence that surrounds her now, we must return to the mountains where her voice was born. But the darkest secret was yet to be revealed. Long before she became a global icon, Dolly Rebecca Parton was a barefoot girl singing to the wind in the great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. Her voice, fragile yet defiant, echoed through the valleys like a promise. Born on January 19, 1946, in Sevier County, she entered a world of cold nights and endless labor. A one-room cabin with no electricity, no running water, and 12 brothers and sisters huddled together for warmth. Her parents were mountain people, proud, poor, and unyielding. Her father, Robert Lee, couldn't read or write, but his hands knew the language of sacrifice. Her mother, Avi Lee, stitched love into everything she touched, even when love was the only thing they had left. They paid the doctor who delivered Dolly with a sack of cornmeal, a detail that would have embarrassed anyone else, but to Dolly, it became part of her legend. From that hard soil, music grew like wildflowers. Her earliest lullabies were the hum of the wind, the sigh of trees, her mother's hymns whispered over a wood stove. "We didn't have much," Dolly would later say, "but we had love and a radio that worked when it wanted to." In the silence of those mountains, she learned the art that would define her life, how to turn pain into song. She wrote her first melodies before she could even spell her name, stringing together the sounds of loss and longing into something that felt like prayer. That same little girl wrapped in patched fabric and faith would one day stand beneath the brightest lights in the world. But her story was never one of luck. It was a story of will, a lifelong fight to make beauty out of suffering, and the first blow of that suffering came early in the shape of death. But the mountains had more lessons to teach her. In the deep hollows of the great Smoky Mountains, winters could stretch so long that spring felt like a rumor. The Parton family cabin sat crouched between ridges, its thin walls shaking with every gust of wind. 12 children shared one blanket. When the air grew brittle and the fire died, they clung to each other for warmth. "The only warm thing we had," Dolly would later say. Poverty wasn't a chapter of her story. It was the soil that raised her. Her mother's hands were raw from sewing, her father's back bent from hauling gravel and wood. Yet in those nights of hunger and cold, Dolly found music. She sang to the darkness so it wouldn't win. She hummed to her baby brothers and sisters, her tiny voice steady against the howl of the mountain wind. But the first heartbreak that would shape her art came when she was 9. Her baby brother Larry lived only 4 days. There was no funeral, no headstone, just a patch of earth behind the cabin. Her mother sat in silence. Her father worked longer hours, and little Dolly learned that love could vanish before it even had a name. Years later, she would admit that some of her songs were written as conversations with the brothers she barely met. School didn't offer escape. One winter, her mother sewed her a coat made from scraps, each patch chosen with love. Dolly wore it proudly, but her classmates laughed. To them, it was rags. To her, it was her mother's heart stitched together with prayers. She walked home through the snow, her tears hot against her cheeks. That moment, raw and humiliating, would one day become her redemption. Coat of Many Colors wasn't just a song, it was her childhood rewritten in grace. The world heard a melody, Dolly heard forgiveness. By the time she turned 10, she had already decided her fate. "I'll sing my way out," she whispered. The mountains had taken her brother, her pride, her comfort, but they had given her a voice that refused to break. That voice would soon lead her far beyond the hills of Tennessee. But the road to Nashville was never paved with mercy. When Dolly Parton left Sevier County after high school in 1964, the morning air was sharp and full of promise. She was just 18, standing on a dirt road with a cardboard suitcase in one hand and $20 in the other. Behind her, the mountains were still wrapped in fog. Ahead lay Nashville, the city of broken dreams and borrowed chances. "I'll make it," she whispered to herself, "or I won't come back at all." Nashville didn't roll out a welcome mat. It was loud, hard, and unkind to girls who spoke with mountain accents and dressed in homemade clothes. She worked small clubs, tiny studios, smoky bars where drunks talked over her songs. Some called her sweetheart and never called again. Others told her she was too country, too mountain, too much. But Dolly didn't soften her edges. She sharpened them. She sang through rejection, through exhaustion, through nights spent writing by candlelight when she couldn't afford the power bill. "I used to hum just to hear something alive," she said. Then in 1965, a miracle though it came with strings attached, Monument Records offered her a deal, but tried to change her. They wanted pop, not mountain soul. They handed her glossy songs, told her to smile wider. She sang them perfectly, but felt hollow inside. It was like wearing someone else's skin, she would later confess. Her singles failed, calls stopped coming, the label cooled, but she kept writing in notebooks, on envelopes, even on the backs of old receipts. In 1966, she co-wrote a song with her uncle Bill Owens called "Put It Off Until Tomorrow." It became a #1 hit, not for her, but for another singer. Yet it was enough to make Nashville ask, "Who's Dolly Parton?" The answer came a year later with her debut album, "Hello, I'm Dolly." It wasn't just an introduction, it was a declaration. The songs were carved from hunger and faith, each lyric breathing defiance. She wasn't just another pretty voice. She was a storyteller of the poor, the lonely, the unbroken. Still, success didn't come easy. When she joined the Porter Wagoner Show in 1967, she became a household name but also a shadow. Porter was both mentor and gatekeeper. Their duets lit up the charts, but backstage tension grew. She wanted independence, he wanted control. Fame began to feel like a cage lined with gold. By 1973, she made the hardest choice of her life to leave the show, to walk away from the man who had opened every door but locked the last one. Her goodbye wasn't shouted, it was sung. "I will always love you." Her farewell, wrapped in grace. The song was heartbreak, turned holy, and when it hit #1, she cried all the way to the top. That was the moment the world finally understood Dolly Parton wasn't anyone's girl. She was her own woman. But while the world saw glitter behind the stage lights, something darker was beginning to stir, because even legends can break when the applause fades. By the mid-1970s, Dolly Parton had become unstoppable. Her voice poured out of radios across America, her smile shone from every television screen, and her name became the very symbol of country music. Jolene haunted the airwaves with its aching plea, "And I will always love you," turned goodbye into something sacred. She was a force of light, radiant, fearless, unstoppable. But behind that glow was exhaustion, heartbreak, and a loneliness that success could never touch. Each stage was a battlefield fought in rhinestones. Cameras flashed, crowds roared, and she stood flawless beneath blinding lights. But when the curtain fell, the woman behind the legend trembled. Endless tours, interviews, photo shoots. She gave the world everything she had, and the world wanted more. "I'd sparkle so hard, I almost disappeared," she once said with a laugh that didn't quite hide the truth. Porter Wagoner's absence still followed her. Their creative tension had cut deep, and the farewell song that set her free also left a scar. Fame demanded that she smile through it, but the weight of expectation grew heavier with every step. When she crossed over to pop with Here You Come Again in 1977, purists called her a traitor. She just smiled and said, "I wasn't leaving country, I was taking it with me." Yet that smile hid sleepless nights, a body running on coffee and adrenaline, and a heart worn thin from the noise. Then came 1980, 9 to 5. Written between film shoots and fatigue, it became an anthem for every woman who had ever worked herself to the edge. The world cheered, the industry bowed, and still behind closed doors, Dolly whispered prayers to get through the next morning. Her back ached from corsets, her fingers blistered from the guitar, and her voice, once as clear as a mountain stream, sometimes cracked under the strain. But she never canceled a show. She sang through fever, through pain, through tears no one saw. Her fame had become her armor, and that armor was heavy. Even as she won Grammys and broke records, her body began to falter. What started as exhaustion grew into something darker, something that would soon threaten everything she had built. She was the brightest star in the room, but stars burn fastest just before they fade, and the fall was already beginning. For most of her life, Dolly Parton had been the one who healed others. Through her songs, she stitched hearts back together, but nothing in her long, shining journey could prepare her for the heartbreak that arrived quietly close to home and far beyond repair. Her niece Teaver was only 36, young, fragile, and still searching for light in a world that had never been kind. When the news broke, it didn't come with headlines or spectacle. It came in silence, the kind that steals breath. Reports said it was an overdose, the end of a battle she had fought alone for years. Dolly, the woman who had lifted millions, now found herself powerless. She had seen the warning signs, the loneliness, the weight of court battles, the slow unraveling. She had tried to help not with words but with action. She paid $25,000 for her niece's rehab, praying that this time the story would find another verse. "I just wanted her to have another chance," she whispered later when the grief was still too heavy to hide. But the healing never came. When the call arrived, the world didn't see the tears. There was no public mourning, no interviews, just a private service, a few family members, and a woman who had given everything sitting still in the front pew, silent, pale, and shattered. Those who were there said she barely spoke, only stared at the chapel door as if waiting for her niece to walk through one last time. In her music, Dolly had turned every sorrow into light poverty, heartbreak, loss. But this was different. This was the one she couldn't save. Friends said she stopped writing for weeks. Her laughter became rare. She would fall quiet mid-sentence, eyes distant, as if hearing a melody only she could hear, one that ended before its chorus. How could someone who had given books to millions of children not save one of her own? She would later ask herself. It was a question without an answer. The pain was raw, unresolvable, the kind that teaches humility even to the strongest hearts. Through that ache, she learned that love's truest form isn't about saving someone, it's about staying even when you can't. Her faith, her fame, her fortune, none of it shielded her from the simple truth that loss always finds a way in. In interviews after she spoke softly, "Some songs you just can't finish, they live inside you instead." That was the song of her niece, unfinished, untitled but eternal. And for the first time, Dolly's voice trembled, not from melody, but from mourning. By the early 1980s, the glitter of fame could no longer hide the shadows growing inside Dolly Parton. Years of relentless touring film sets, sleepless nights, and the weight of being a legend had taken their toll. What began as fatigue soon deepened into something far crueler. Her doctors called it endometriosis, a word that would change her life forever. She was just 36 when the diagnosis came. The pain was unbearable, her body rebelling against her will. Surgeries followed, each one carving away at her strength until the day she woke from anesthesia to a silence that no applause could fill. she would never be able to bear a child. It wasn't just physical loss, it was spiritual. The dream she had carried since childhood of a home filled with laughter and tiny footsteps vanished. She sat in her quiet house, the clock ticking too loud, the refrigerator humming like a ghost. "I didn't just lose the dream of a child," she said softly. "I lost a part of myself." She tried to keep busy, tried to sing, but her music fell silent. For months she withdrew from the world. Her body weakened, her spirit cracked. She stopped writing, stopped performing, stopped believing the light would return. The woman who had once conquered the world could barely get out of bed. Then came the night that nearly ended everything. Alone in her Nashville home, she felt herself slipping, not dramatically, but quietly, the way candlelight fades when no one's watching. She thought of the people she had lost, the songs left unfinished, and the unbearable thought that maybe her story had reached its end. And then a sound, the soft patter of paws. Popeye, her little dog, had wandered in and sat by her feet. He didn't ask for anything, didn't move, just stared at her with unspoken love. She broke down. In that moment, something shifted. That tiny heartbeat, she said later, reminded me I still had one too. It was her moment of rebirth. Slowly, painfully, she began to rise again. Therapy, prayer, faith. They became her new instruments. She started writing once more, songs born from silence and survival. "I didn't sing to be heard," she said. "I sang to stay alive." Those years stripped away the glitter, leaving only truth. Beneath the wigs, the sequins, and the showmanship was a woman who had nearly lost everything and chose to live again. From that moment forward, her music changed. It wasn't just melody anymore. It was testimony, proof that even legends can fall and still rise. But love, not pain, would write her next great song. For the world, Dolly Parton was a constellation of glitter and glory, the woman who conquered every stage, every screen, every heart. But for nearly 60 years, there was one man who knew her not as a legend, but as his Dolly. Carl Dean was the stillness to her storm, the quiet pulse beneath her music. They met in 1964 outside a Nashville laundromat. She was 18, wild-haired and radiant. He was 21, quiet, steady, uninterested in fame. "My first thought was, I'm gonna marry that girl," he'd later say. He did 2 years later in a small private ceremony, without the press, without the show. While the world demanded her sparkle, Carl loved her without spotlight. He never attended her concerts, rarely walked red carpets, and never gave interviews. Yet he was always there, the anchor in her chaos. For decades, he was her home. When the cameras stopped flashing, when the applause faded, he waited with coffee at sunrise and laughter at dinner. "He saw me before the world did," she once said, "and he's loved me long after the world's done watching." Then in 2025, that love story reached its quietest verse. Carl Dean passed away at 82 in the same Nashville house where they had shared their mornings for half a century. There were no headlines, no spectacle, just stillness. Dolly planned the funeral herself, small and sacred, in the cedar chapel Carl had built for her on their land. She filled it with his favorite wildflowers, the same kind he used to leave on her kitchen table in chipped mason jars. Along the altar, she placed photographs unseen by the world, the two of them barefoot on the porch swing, laughing in flannel pajamas, dirt under their fingernails, after gardening. When she stood to speak, her voice trembled. She didn't address the mourners. She spoke only to him. "Thank you," she whispered, "for loving me when I wasn't anyone's Dolly." Then she opened a yellowed letter, one he had written long ago to be read after his death. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. "You were always my shining star, but I never needed the world to know. Just you." The chapel fell silent. She reached for her guitar, the same one he'd bought her before her first hit, and began to play a song no one had ever heard. It was tender, trembling, almost too fragile to bear. Her tears fell freely as she sang the final verse. Those who were there said it felt like heaven itself had paused to listen. When the last note faded, she set the guitar down and stepped into the silence that now belonged to her. In the weeks that followed, She still set 2 cups on the breakfast table each morning. She still turned to speak to an empty chair. Sometimes she swore she could hear his footsteps on the porch or feel his hand brush past her shoulder in the dark. "I've written 1,000 love songs," she said softly, "but he was the only one that ever truly mattered." The legend had lost her greatest duet, and yet in that loss, her love became eternal, a melody that refuses to die. But as her heart broke, her body too began to falter. At 79, Dolly Parton stands at the twilight of an extraordinary life, a life that began in a one-room cabin and rose to the very peaks of music history. Her voice, once a bright fire in the night, now burns softer, steadier, like a candle that refuses to go out. Yet behind the calm of her smile, something fragile stirs, a quiet surrender to time itself. In recent months, she has postponed her Las Vegas residency. Her sister Frida wrote in the middle of the night, "Please pray for my sister Dolly. She hasn't been feeling her best." The post spread like wildfire, not as gossip, but as a wave of love from millions who grew up with her songs. "Coat of many colors," "Jolene," "9 to 5, I Will Always Love You." These weren't just hits. They were hymns for the broken, the working, the lonely. Now those same millions pray for the woman who once prayed for them through song. From her home in Brentwood, Tennessee, the same one she shared with Carl Dean for nearly 60 years, she rises before dawn, not because she must, but because she can't sleep past the hour they once shared coffee. In her kitchen, she still brews 2 cups out of habit. One steams gently across from an empty seat. When the morning light spills through the window, she often walks to the cedar chapel on her property, the one where Carl was laid to rest. There she sits alone, humming melodies no one else will ever hear, songs meant for him and perhaps for God. "I'm not afraid of dying," she said once, her voice trembling. "I just don't want to leave any song unfinished." Her health has slowed her but not stopped her. The sparkle in her eyes flickers but never fades. She calls this chapter her season of stillness. Between doctor visits and quiet days of recovery, she still drifts to her studio, a sunlit room filled with guitars, notebooks, and photos of everyone she has loved and lost. She writes softly now, her pen trembling slightly, her melodies more prayer than performance. Her foundation, the Imagination Library, has now gifted more than 200 million books to children around the world, each one a love letter from a woman who never got to have children of her own. Her laughter still fills Dollywood. Her letters to fans are still signed, "With love, Dolly." She's living proof that the truest measure of greatness isn't in applause, it's in how much love you leave behind. When asked about the years ahead, she smiles and says, "Honey, I've been through worse. The Lord's got me." That's Dolly, humble in faith, indestructible in spirit. Even as her steps slow, the rhythm of her heart hasn't missed a beat. The same rhythm that began in the hollows of the Smoky Mountains, beating against the cold, whispering to the wind, still plays on, steady, brave, unbroken. But her final song is not about fame. It's about forever. When the house falls quiet and the Tennessee night presses soft against the windows, Dolly Parton sometimes hums a tune that no one else will ever hear. It's not for the charts, not for the cameras. It's for the ghosts who walk with her. Her mother's voice in the wind, her brother's laughter in the pines, her niece's fragile smile in the rain, and Carl's steady presence in the silence beside her. Some nights she sits on the porch with her guitar, the same one he bought her before her first record. The strings tremble beneath her fingers, her voice fragile but pure. The world may have changed, the lights may have dimmed, but that sound, tender, mountain-born, carved from faith and fire, still carries through the dark. In the distance, the hills echo back her song. It's the same voice that once sang to the Smoky Mountains, the same voice that lifted millions from sorrow, now singing not to the crowd, but to eternity. A voice that has outlived heartbreak, illness, and time itself. When asked what she hopes people remember about her, she once said that I tried to be kind. It was never the fame she wanted. It was to make the world a little softer before she left it, and in that she succeeded. Every note, Every lyric, every act of generosity was her way of saying, "You're not alone." As dawn breaks over Nashville, the light slips through the chapel window, glinting off Carl's old wedding ring resting beside her Bible. Dolly closes her eyes and whispers the same prayer she's said since childhood. "Thank you, Lord, for letting me sing another day." She may never take the stage again, but her song already belongs to forever. It hums through every radio, every church pew, every kitchen where someone still believes that love can outlast pain. Because Dolly Parton's story was never just about music, it was about mercy, about turning suffering into grace, about teaching the world that broken hearts can still beat in time with heaven. And as the final notes fade into silence, her voice remains soft, defiant, eternal. Some stories were never meant to be known, but now you know.